Chapter 1. The Scrapyard of Giants. The Junkyard Planet surface, a sphere-spanning cataract of derelict starships, shattered orbital defenses, and compressed civic refuse, was not merely a location. It was a testament to galactic waste. Here, the laws of gravity were constantly at war with the magnetic fields of mountains of scrap, resulting in slow-motion avalanches of metal and the ceaseless, discordant symphony of groaning, stressed hulls. Jaxx, the junk scavenger, moved through this metallic maze with the easy familiarity of a born predator. He was on a Syndicate collective retrieval mission, a high-stakes job brokered through a dozen untraceable channels. The extraction of a captured cryptographer held deep within the core of a collapsed dreadnought. The cryptographer was a Syndicate asset, and the information she carried was a threat to a rival faction. Jaxx's mission was clear: get the asset and get out. He stopped, his augmented visor scanning the silhouette of a massive, upturned engine cowling that shielded the prisoner's location. His partner, the pilot ace, Ikarus, was already waiting in the shadow of the cowling. Ikarus was all muscle and rigid discipline, a mercenary whose loyalties were as cold and sharp as the pulse rifle he was currently field stripping. "Took you long enough, Jaxx." Ikarus's voice was a low growl through the comms. "The guard patrols are cycling every 15 minutes. We've got less than 5 until the next sweep." "Relax, Ikarus," Jaxx drawled, vaulting a stack of crush speeders. "You focus on the heavy lifting. I'll make sure the hull breach doesn't collapse the entire sector." Jaxx was a master of the opportunistic strike, his movements a blend of intuition and practiced agility. But Ikarus had always preferred a direct, overwhelming force, and Jaxx felt the pilot ace's impatient energy even through the static of the comm unit. "I was hired for extraction, not structural engineering," Ikarus countered, snapping his rifle back together. "I go in, I retrieve the package, and I bring her to the pickup point. Simple." Jaxx arrived beside him, gesturing to the collapsed dreadnought. "It's never simple. The hull is a mess of live conduits and pressure traps. The cell is 300 meters in. We go in together, split the workload. You brute force the cell door, I'll clear the path." The cryptographer was being held in a reinforced medical bay deep within the wreckage, a location deliberately chosen for its instability. The Syndicate wanted her out, but they wouldn't risk an army. They sent a surgical team, a master of chaotic resourcefulness and a master of violent execution. "No," Ikarus said, shaking his head. "I'm going alone. You stay here. Provide cover fire if I draw too much heat. You're good at hiding, Jaxx. Use that talent." Jaxx's eyes narrowed. The rivalry between them, always a low simmer, was boiling over. "You think this is a game of who's the tougher dog, Ikarus? The moment you touch that cell door, the entire sector will register the breach. We need finesse. We need to work smart." Ikarus took a single deliberate step, closing the distance between them. The pilot ace's enhanced armor plating made him a mountain of moving metal. "I don't need smarts. I need results. And I don't need a shadow to slow me down. You're on Overwatch, Scavenger. That's an order." Ikarus was operating on his own mercenary contract, one that granted him temporary field authority. Jaxx resented the imposition, but knew that arguing now would only waste precious seconds. "Fine," Jaxx spat, pulling back behind the shelter of a crushed starship wing. "But when you hit a wall, don't come crying to the little guy for a ladder." Ikarus didn't acknowledge the jab. He simply nodded once and melted away into the gloom of the scrap mountain. Jaxx watched the massive dreadnought hull absorb the pilot ace, the hulking figure disappearing into the maze of wreckage. Chapter 2. The Heart of the Dreadnought. Inside the dreadnought's wreckage, the environment was a zero-lux coffin of stressed metal and electrical discharge. Ikarus moved with relentless military precision. The prisoner's coordinates were displayed on his internal HUD, a single beacon shining deep within the ship's guts. He navigated the collapsing corridors, ignoring the protests of the structure. A plasma conduit ruptured 10 meters ahead, bathing the passageway in a blinding blue light. Ikarus neither flinched nor slowed. He simply calculated the safest path through the debris and powered on. His strength was his greatest weapon, allowing him to treat obstacles, be they armored guards or collapsed support beams, as temporary nuisances. He came to a stop before a massive reinforced steel door, the only thing separating him from the cryptographer. This was the target. The door was sealed by 5 massive maglocks, wired directly into the dreadnought's core battery. Any attempt to cut power would be registered as a hostile breach and trigger a localized lockdown, or worse. Ikarus ignored the complexity. He planted his boot on a small exposed control panel and crushed it, severing the external security feed. He then raised his pulse rifle and fired a series of high-energy blasts at the central locking mechanism. The air filled with the screech of tortured metal and the deafening ring of the shots. He was announcing his presence with an explosion of force, gambling that the speed of the breach would negate any coordinated response. He was right. Alarms blared throughout the sector, and he could hear the heavy thud of approaching mercenary boots. But the lock was already compromised. He holstered his rifle and, with a guttural roar, brought his immense strength to bear. He wrapped his gauntlet hands around the edges of the mangled door and pulled. The metal shrieked in protest, the maglock snapping like brittle synth cord. With a final agonizing wrench, the door tore free from its frame, collapsing into the chamber with a thunderous crash. The room beyond was a small, grimy medical bay. The cryptographer, a woman in a tattered Syndicate jumpsuit, was chained to a gurney. She looked up, her face etched with exhaustion, but her eyes were still burning with a defiant intelligence. "Ikarus," she whispered, recognizing the signature armor plating. "You made it." "Extraction is complete," Ikarus grunted, already moving to cut her free. "Hold still." He was methodical and quick, his focus solely on the mission parameters. He didn't notice the small, multifaceted device, no larger than his thumb, attached to the back of the gurney. It wasn't a Syndicate tracking device. It was a failsafe planted by the rival faction. The moment the final chain snapped, a small, pressurized charge detonated near the dreadnought's reactor core, 3 levels below. It wasn't an explosion intended to destroy the ship. It was a catastrophic pressure release valve. The entire dreadnought buckled. "Ikarus," they rigged the core. "The whole sector is collapsing." Jaxx's frantic voice cut through the comms. Ikarus grabbed the cryptographer and slung her over his shoulder. "I have the asset." Moving to the extraction point. His mission was the asset. Structural integrity was secondary. He charged out of the ruptured cell door, now facing an impossible journey through a rapidly collapsing starship. His tremendous physical strength allowed him to sprint, leaping over fissures, opening in the deck, plating and shouldering aside collapsing support struts. He was an embodiment of overwhelming force, and for a short, desperate time, he beat the collapsing hull. Chapter 3. The Double Cross. Jaxx watched from his vantage point as the scrap mountain began to shift and groan. He could track Ikarus's progress by the explosions of dust and debris marking his path. The pilot ace was moving fast, but the collapse was moving faster. Jaxx swore under his breath. Ikarus's brute force approach had triggered the failsafe, exactly as Jaxx had predicted. He scanned his immediate environment, calculating escape routes and contingencies. The only way Ikarus was getting out was if the Scavenger cleared a path. "Jaxx, I'm in the primary cargo elevator shaft. The deck plating is collapsing beneath me." Ikarus's voice was ragged with effort, but his cadence was still all command. "Hold position," Jaxx yelled, racing across the scrap, his smaller, more agile frame allowing him to navigate the shifting terrain with practiced ease. He reached a point directly above the elevator shaft Ikarus was using. The ceiling was a tangled mess of broken fiber optic lines and ruptured hydraulics. Below, he could see the faintest shimmer of Ikarus's tactical light. The pilot ace was clinging to a single, thick cable, the cryptographer still slung over his shoulder. "The main cable is melting. I need a new anchor point now," Ikarus demanded. His raw, unyielding strength was keeping him alive, but it was not enough to defy the laws of material science. Jaxx saw it, a massive articulated crane arm designed to lift engine cores, lying dormant 50 meters away. Its mag grapple was still functional, and its cabling was a single unbroken line of reinforced carbon fiber. It was the only thing strong enough to hold Ikarus's weight and the prisoners. "I'm rerouting the main crane arm to your position." It's going to be a rough ride. Jaxx scrambled onto the arm, interfacing his datapad with the crane's auxiliary controls. His fingers flew across the screen, overriding the safety protocols. The massive arm groaned to life, slowly swinging its magnetic grapple toward the elevator shaft. As the crane arm swung, a trio of Syndicate enforcers, dispatched by the rival faction to ensure the cryptographer was never extracted, burst from a side tunnel. They weren't interested in the prisoner. They were interested in stopping the retrieval. They immediately opened fire on Jaxx, plasma bolts tearing up the metal scrap around him. Jaxx ducked, returning fire with his own salvage pistol, but he never let up on the crane controls. He had to keep the focus on the mission. He managed to move the grapple into position just above Ikarus. Now Ikarus, grab the grapple. Jaxx screamed. Ikarus, his face strained from the effort of holding their combined weight, released the melting cable and, with a single powerful leap, seized the mag grapple. He transferred the weight of the cryptographer to his back and gave Jaxx the signal. Jaxx pulled the crane arm back, but the enforcers were now focusing their fire on the crane's engine housing. Plasma bolts hammered the mechanism. The arm lurched violently, but it held, pulling Ikarus and the cryptographer clear of the rapidly collapsing elevator shaft. Jaxx was succeeding through pure, desperate resourcefulness, but he was exposed. Then the second catastrophic betrayal occurred. Ikarus was pulled to safety, landing heavily on the main hull near Jaxx. He immediately took aim and efficiently neutralized the three enforcers with a short, brutal burst of fire. Jaxx breathed a sigh of relief, dropping his pistol. That was close. Now let's get the asset to the extraction point. Ikarus turned, his helmet visor glowing with an unnerving amber light. He looked at Jaxx, his grip tightening on the cryptographer's arm. Extraction is complete, Jaxx, Ikarus said, his voice flat. My extraction is complete. Before Jaxx could react, Ikarus delivered a single, devastating punch to the Scavenger's jaw. The blow, fueled by the pilot Ace's superior strength and discipline, sent Jaxx flying, his head slamming hard against a steel strut. His vision tunneled into a blinding white flash. Ikarus stood over him, holding the dazed cryptographer. The Syndicate is too loose, Jaxx. Too many unpredictable elements. My new clients offer stability order, and they offered me a much bigger payout for the asset and the elimination of any witnesses. Chapter 4. The Price of Failure. Jaxx could taste blood, and the world was swimming. He struggled to push himself up, but his body wouldn't obey. The single decisive blow had completely incapacitated him, a brutal testament to Ikarus' strength. He watched helpless as the pilot aced through the cryptographer over his shoulder and began to sprint toward the nearby, sleek Syndicate dropship that had just materialized over the rising plume of dust. "You're a Syndicate man, Ikarus. He'll be hunted down." Jaxx managed to rasp, the words thick with pain. "No, Jaxx," Ikarus said, not stopping, not even turning back. "I'm a professional, and professionals change employers. You, on the other hand, are just a scavenger who got in the way." The dropship ramp opened. Ikarus stepped on board, and a second later, the ship shot into the sky, leaving a vortex of scrap metal and dust in its wake. The speed and precision of the extraction, the final double-cross, was a brutal work of art, executed by a man whose loyalty was solely to his own wallet. Jaxx was left alone on the collapsing hull, the Syndicate asset gone, the dropship a fading speck of light, and the rival faction's enforcers dead. A perfect, untraceable betrayal. He had been outmaneuvered not by intellect or fortune, but by sheer, overwhelming force. His survival instincts and resourcefulness meant nothing against the devastating power of the man he'd partnered with. He had done his part, saving Ikarus from the collapsing wreck, only to be discarded the moment his services were no longer required. The Syndicate would hear his report, but the mission was lost, the asset was compromised, and the man responsible was already long gone. He finally managed to push himself to his hands and knees, spitting out a mouthful of blood and dust. The Junkyard Planet surface was silent again, save for the ceaseless groaning of the dying dreadnought. Jaxx had survived a small victory of his own, but the mission was a catastrophic failure. The pilot ace, the mercenary of immense strength, had ensured the overall goal of the Syndicate extraction ended in ruin through a spectacular act of betrayal.